Welcome to Paranormal M, the portal to the extraordinary stories that push the boundaries of imagination. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to be part of our ongoing exploration into the inexplicable. Lights with a message. In 2018, my grandfather passed away after 4 years of struggling with dementia, an awful disease that strips a person of almost everything that really makes them who they are. It was a very difficult time for me because, as his only family member, I had to take full responsibility for his finances and important health decisions. Not to mention the guilt I was carrying around, mostly because he was living in a nursing home due to needing 24-hour care. The day after the hospital called to say that he died, I made the 6-hour journey by train to his home. I fumbled my way through the next 3 days, registering his death, arranging his funeral and flowers, contacting the relevant people, all of that. Not really sure if I was doing the right things by him, and second-guessing each decision that I did make. After my grandfather's funeral, I returned home, in a state of disbelief that I'd just said goodbye to the last member of my family. I got to bed that night worrying about whether I'd done this and if it was the right thing to do or not. I happened to turn towards the window, just as a beautiful rainbow-patterned light sparkled across my blackout blind. There was one, then two, then loads of these lights, which seemed to be on my blinds. They made me think of the light flashes that you get from a spinning glitter ball. They appeared to rain down and dance across my blinds. These lights were so bright that they were visible in the hallway, as my partner in the other room saw them too. The lights were visible for maybe 7 seconds before fading out. I was scared for a second or two, but then I was just amazed by them. I got a really calming feeling come over me and took the lights to either be my grandfather or be a message from him. I like to think that the message was a thank you, or maybe an all is well. For the next half hour, I tried recreating the lights in order to come up with some kind of rational explanation, but I couldn't. No light ever comes through that blind, nor does any light come through the blind in the other bedroom. There are no windows in the hallway. I've not seen the light since. Anyway, not a scary experience. In fact, it kind of gave me comfort when I needed it. It was like my grandfather acknowledged everything that I'd done for him, which at the time he was still alive and he wasn't really aware of. The Hooded Monk. This was a story told to me by my grandfather years before he had passed away. My grandparents were both born in the first half of the 1920s, and they were brought up by my parents and family who were very much Victorian in their ways. What you saw is what you got. They were both highly intelligent, honest, hardworking, and didn't have time for BS. To say I was surprised by my grandfather telling me a ghost story is a massive understatement. He began by asking me, "Have we ever told you about the monk?" Anyway, my grandfather said that a few years beforehand, my grandma had gotten up out of bed at about 6 a.m. and made her way downstairs to make a pot of tea. This was her everyday routine, one that she'd been doing each day of her married life for the past 60 years. My grandma walked along the hall toward the kitchen ahead of her, and on her way she saw my grandfather in the dining room on the right-hand side of the hall. She saw him by the sideboard, wearing what she assumed was his dressing gown, hood up over his head. My grandma had called out, "Morning, Ken," and continued on her way to the kitchen. After making the pot of tea, my grandma had taken the tea tray into the lounge and discovered my grandfather, dressed in his clothes, sat up in his chair reading the newspaper. She had made a comment on how he'd got dressed quickly this morning, and confused by the comment, he asked what she meant. That's when Grandma had told him that she'd seen him 5 minutes ago in the dining room, dressed in his dressing gown. She said that she'd called out to him, but perhaps he'd not heard her with that hood up over his head. My grandfather was now even more confused, because he didn't even have a hood on his dressing gown. They laughed the event off, putting it down to hallucinations caused by deteriorating eyesight. But my grandfather said he was a bit worried at the time that it could just be a sign of dementia. To a couple in their 80s, dementia is far more scary of a prospect than seeing a ghost. My grandparents didn't talk about this strange incident again until the same thing happened to my grandfather sometime later. He had been to the bathroom, which was opposite the lounge, and from there you could see half of the dining room. He told me that he had come out of the bathroom to return to the lounge, and as he walked across the hall, he caught sight of my grandma in her dressing gown with the hood up, walking towards the dining room window. By the time he reached the lounge, he realized that this was not my grandma, and he headed into the dining room to investigate. There was nobody in the dining room, and my grandma was in the kitchen. My grandfather told me that. He was immediately relieved that he'd seen the person in the hood too, because that meant my grandma wasn't quote-unquote losing it. And two, he believed that they had seen a ghost, and because of the hooded robe that it wore, they decided that it must be a monk. Hearing my grandfather talking about ghosts was great. It was a subject I never dreamt of discussing with him. Hearing this completely genuine person tell me they'd seen a ghost of a monk just solidified my belief in the paranormal. It scared the shit out of me too, though. The quote-unquote wigglers. After leaving my mom's house and moving from place to place with my dad for a couple of years, we eventually moved into our very own home. We'd been living with his new girlfriend, but that had broken down and we ended up sofa surfing for a while. So it felt really good to be settled in our own home. My friends from secondary school lived close by. I had my bedroom and things were just easier. As I was getting older and more independent at this time, I'd often be in the house alone. I'd get home from school before my dad finished work, and some evenings my dad would be out. It was when I was on my own that I realized I didn't feel like I was on my own, and that feeling of dread I knew too well had returned. Like at my mom's house, the feeling would come. Then it would begin to build and build until it was unbearable. The space between our front room and dining room, at the bottom of the stairs, is where I would sense something hanging around. Whenever I passed the foot of the stairs, I would get the feeling something was up there, waiting to pounce. I'd usually rush across the space, but sometimes I would walk it and brave a quick glance upstairs. Whenever I felt uneasy, I would pretend that someone was home with me, and I'd call out something like, "I'll be there now in a minute, Dad," thinking that I could trick the scary something into believing I wasn't alone. I would hear things walking or moving upstairs, or just out of view in another room. That sensation someone was lurking behind me happened regularly. I would have to leave the house and sit outside until I felt the fear subside and I could go back in. The worst ever experience in that house was when my dad had gone out with his new girlfriend one night and I was home with my 2 cats. I also had my dad's girlfriend's dog with me, a beautiful German Shepherd type dog. I'd been watching TV downstairs most of the evening, but I began feeling uneasy in the front room. So I went upstairs to my bedroom to distract myself with a book or a magazine, with one of my cats next to me on the bed. and the dog sat on the floor next to my bed. That damned feeling of something lurking was still there and beginning to build. I noticed my cat looking to the window wall that had a boiler there on the wall. Health and safety. She was sat fixated on something. I then turned to the dog. She was sat rigid and upright, nose pointing forwards, looking to the exact same spot as the cat was. My heart sank. That awful terror turned my stomach and gave me an instant cold sweat. Slowly I turned back to look where they were looking, to see whatever they could see, and I saw it. Coming from the area of the boiler, there were 4 smoky, misty balls, orbs, and a chain. The only way I could describe it at the time was that it moved like a wiggler, the caterpillar in Mario. They were not joined together, but they were moving together, away from the wall in midair, near where the boiler was. Now, this was not smoke. It was not something to do with the boiler. It was something else, but what? I don't know. They were a white, pale gray color, not solid, nor totally see-through. They were like tennis ball-sized bubbles filled with smoke, but with no obvious edges. The smoke or mist was moving in a way that it gave the impression of a ball shape, completely unlike anything I'd ever seen. So totally horrified, I grabbed my cat, got off the bed, called the dog to follow me, opened the door, and we ran. We ran straight down the stairs to the front room, through the porch and out onto the doorstep. It was late, dark, and very cold, but I was too terrified to go back in. We sat there for a couple of hours, and the dog in the porch area, me on the cold concrete steps until gone past midnight, waiting for my dad and his girlfriend to come home. They were shocked to find me sat out there when they came back. They were obviously concerned about the fact that I'd been so scared inside. I chose to sit outside. However, I don't think they believed me when I told them about the wigglers. Darkness within the dark. At our house, we could often hear footsteps upstairs. We would be sat in our front room and hear the steps through the ceiling, followed by the creaks that the steps caused within the floorboards. Mom and Dad would simply put it down to the house settling at the end of the day. I wasn't convinced at the time, and I'm still not. Although it was a very pleasant room with no creepiness happening in it, I can remember being really annoyed that my parents put me in the bedroom that they did. They had taken the attic room for themselves, and I was scared that if the unknown something that I felt within the house came up the stairs, it would get me first, and they would be too far away to save me. The stairs went up from the ground floor to the small landing, with my room directly on the left and the other bedroom to the right. You had to take a step up to the right to get to the other room, crossing the hallway which ran back parallel to the stairs. So that room had a buffer from the stairs, if you see what I mean. I moaned and begged to be moved to the bedroom opposite, as it felt safer being in there. However, once I moved into that bedroom, I began experiencing scary stuff. I would lie awake in bed, in the total dark. I could see what I always described as darker areas of darkness. Shadow people? I hated it. Some of the darkness would begin to gather together and then swirl. Others would form the shape of a figure. I still worry about seeing the dark shapes in the darkness now, so I tend to have a light on or keep my eyes closed until I get the light on. I really do not want to see the darkness within the dark ever again. Often I would get the feeling of being watched, as though there was somebody standing behind me, or that someone had entered my room. Yet, when I turned around to see who it was, no one was there. You generally know if someone is looking at you without actually seeing them doing so. You get a feeling and look up or turn around and you catch them at it. Well, this was that feeling. Another feeling I got was a change in the atmosphere, so it felt kind of heavy and claustrophobic. Sometimes I would get some sort of adrenaline rush, a fight or flight type reaction, an odd, panicky dread feeling in my tummy or chest, kind of like being at the top of the hill on a roller coaster, just before you tip over the edge and go back down. The feeling of impending doom, one could say. There were many types of strangeness occurring in that house, but I think the last scary thing I experienced there was when I was about 9 and I was actually living there anymore. I wasn't there. My dad had moved out, and after a while, I'd gone to live with him. I had returned to visit my mom for the overnight stay. All I remember about the visit was going to bed that night, absolutely terrified that I was going to see the dark patches of dark moving about, forming shapes.
Gecko.
And giving me that awful feeling of panic terror. I eventually got myself to sleep, and I had been sleeping for a few hours when I woke with a start. I sat up and could see that it was still very dark around me, and I began to panic. I fumbled about for the lamp behind me and tried to feel for the switch. After what seemed like forever, but was probably only 5 seconds, I found the switch and pushed it. Bang! The stupid bloody light bulb blew out. I crawled to the end of my bed and went for the switch on the wall for the main light. That bulb flickered on briefly before popping out of existence, plunging me back into darkness. At that moment, I felt extremely unwelcome in my old bedroom in my mom's house. It felt like the house wanted me out. It reminded me of the previous time that the bulb had blown in the front room. It made me think of the time I got told off for turning off the stereo that I didn't even touch, the horrible footsteps and constant noises around the place. I just felt like the house wanted me to go. Anyway, I did go. I stayed living with my dad and left that creepy old house behind. Unfortunately, whatever it was that had been haunting the house seemed to actually be haunting me, and within a couple of years, it had gone bad again. The house hated me. More from the house in England. I remember sitting in the living room with my mom one time, when I was about maybe 6 or 7 years old. She was reading a book. Mom loved her books, and was listening to the radio. I was not enjoying the music, and I think because I wanted the TV on, I had moaned and just asked if we could turn off the stereo. Mom said no, and I was sulking. Now, to turn the radio off, you had to physically switch this button from left to right, or push a different button to turn off just the radio. I know this for sure as I actually had this stereo until about 3 years ago. Anyway, after a bit of this, it's not fair from me, and my mom managed to calm me down and got back to reading her book, as I once again sat doing my coloring book. A short time passed and the room went silent. The stereo had been turned off. My mom was not impressed, as she obviously thought I'd gone against what she had just said. Although I initially found it quite funny, thinking I'd mysteriously gotten my way after all, I soon became upset and angry because my mom didn't believe that I'd not switched it off. She'd been convinced that it was me because of the fact that the switch had been moved across and couldn't just happen on its own. Somehow, my mom thought I'd gotten up, gone across the room, switched it off, and then returned to my coloring book within a matter of seconds without being seen or heard. There were often times when the house, or whatever was causing these things to happen, made me feel very, very unwelcome. It felt as though the house just hated me. Probably sounds nuts, but that's the feeling that I got. Another time, one evening, Mom and I were again sat in the living room, chilling out. I know it was evening time because the little table lamp was switched on. I was actually watching the TV this time. And guess what? Guess what my mom was doing? That's right, reading a book. So anyway, we're in there enjoying our own things when the light bulb died. It popped quite loudly and blinked out. Now this is a relatively normal occurrence, but what made this really bizarre was that my mom started laughing to herself and then said something like, "That's weird, I just read in my book, then bam, the lights went out." She showed me the page that she was on and the words were there in black and white. Probably just some sort of random coincidence, which was quite funny at the time, but looking back at it with all the other stuff that was going on, it's a little creepy. Footsteps on the stairs. I lived with my parents in a small village in England from the mid-'80s to early '90s. The house was built of thick stone and had 4 floors. On the ground floor was the living room and dining room. The first floor had 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. The top floor was an attic bedroom, and from the dining room on the ground floor, you went down a set of wooden stairs to the lower floor. This was originally the cellar, basement, but had been converted into a kitchen at some point before we had moved in. Over the years, we experienced many strange going-ons in this house, and we often heard movement from upstairs. My parents explained this away as the house settling, but even at the age of 7, I knew it was more than just timbers expanding and contracting with the temperature changes. We got the normal creaks and cracks, but you'd also hear shuffling and dragging type sounds, along with occasional footsteps across the ceiling. Also, the house created this feeling of fear. It was like a negative charge that would build and build until something happened. A feeling of impending doom hanging in the air. Just before my 8th birthday, my parents broke up and my dad moved out of the house. One afternoon, my mom had to go out somewhere and I was left home alone. Excuse me. At this point, I had turned 8, and although probably a little young to be left alone, I wasn't going to be for long, and my best friend actually lived right next door, so I could knock round if I needed anything. I decided to go play Captain Planet on my Commodore Amiga, which was set up on the desk in the dining room. I'm sat there facing toward the wall, like joining my neighbors, my back to the doorway into the living room. On my right-hand side was the doorway to the wooden staircase and the wall which obscured my view of those stairs. At some point, I became aware of slight movement in the kitchen, and then it happened. There was a footstep on the stairs, a very clear and precise footstep on a wooden step in an empty house. The feeling of dread swept in and my heart sank in my stomach as I heard a second step on that staircase. Now, because these stairs are wooden, you could actually hear where someone was on those stairs. The bottom step was a very low, solid sound, whereas the top was a much higher pitch and almost hollow sounding. Then I heard the next step. They were slow steps and definitely coming up toward me. I started to get my feet ready to run when I completely froze. I was scared stiff and couldn't make my legs work. I had never been so unbelievably terrified in my life. So the steps continued, and the pitch of them was getting higher and higher. I knew that in a matter of seconds, the who or what was going to be up high enough for me to see them through the doorway, and this was too much to bear. I had to get out now. so I literally pushed myself off the desk with my hands and more or less dragged myself along by grabbing on pieces of furniture. My legs went from totally dead to jelly-like, and I managed to get myself into the living room and out the front door. I knocked on my neighbor's door and my friend's dad ran round to check who was in the house. Yet, there was nobody there. I stayed next door until my mom came back and she verified that she had not returned earlier on, so they were not her footsteps. The incident was put down to just your imagination playing tricks on you. But I know what I heard, and I know how badly it terrified me. I never heard the footsteps on the stairs again, thankfully. But I did continue to have other experiences. Although I was scared in that house, I'm glad I got to experience it at all, as it's made me who I am today. Something follows me. I was about 4 years old when I first saw it. My stepfather at the time warned me not to get too close to the trees or it would get me. But I wanted to play outside anyway, so I stepped outside and peered around because the trailer I lived in at that time was right next to a forest. And when I turned to look at the corner that was near the trees, a black, massive thing with yellow eyes peered around the side at me and grabbed the side of the house with inky claws. For years, I asked my mother what it was because she's no longer with said stepfather. And she doesn't remember anything from that night besides me running inside screaming and crying. My stepfather at that time had no recollection of ever warning me of anything either. Eventually, I forgot about it, till 3 years ago. I was sharing a room with a roommate, and we were home alone and laughing. I got up to go get snacks, but she suddenly stops laughing and says, "Don't go out there, he's waiting for you," which of course struck an intense fear within me. I asked her to repeat what she just said, and immediately she looked confused and said, "I didn't say anything." Obviously, I was freaked out and made her leave the room first. Thankfully, nothing happened. But as I lived in that apartment, I dreamt about that thing crawling out of my closet and trapping me in my room. I could see that it had large antlers and the body of a man, inky claws, and a rabbit skull for a head. It got to the point where I asked to switch rooms because I thought it was just me being paranoid about the closet. But then my roommate, when she took over the room, claims that she woke up to something standing in the corner, watching her. She described the antlers, but for some reason, didn't bother to mention it to her, so she stayed in the room. Eventually, I moved into where I live now, and in the back of the house is once again against a lining of trees. I work third shift, so when I leave for work, every now and then I get very sickly scared of just the trees and my gut feeling that it's going to come around the corner, so I run to the car. This feeling happened 2 nights ago, and I don't know what it is, but I'm afraid it's trying to find me. And it's upsetting because hardly anyone takes me seriously about it lately. It doesn't feel like a demon. It feels more than that. More cryptid-like. I've Googled anything that might resemble antlers, a rabbit skull, and the body of a man. It also just looks like it dipped itself in a lot of ink and tar. I used to call it the boogeyman, but now I'm not sure. I know it wants to do me harm, though. Ghosts in the Bathroom, the Courthouse Hotel, London. Most of my friends at the time lived or worked in the area, so there was usually something fun going on after I finished my shift. which was normally 7 p.m. One evening, 3 of my friends were in town and ended up heading to the courthouse London for dinner. If you walk down Carnaby Street towards Liberty, London, the courthouse is just at the bottom, over the road. It's a pretty swish hotel with a bar and a restaurant, but it used to be a magistrate's court. It still has a lot of the original features, including the old jail cells, where you can have drinks in the courtroom and the restaurant seating area. Anyway, one of my friends had planned ahead and booked us a table. Although we turned up, there was only one other couple dining in there as far as I can remember. It was a weeknight, so I wasn't busy at all. We had dinner and chatted. The night was like any other night. Any other night out for dinner, that is. And I'm not a big drinker. I don't remember drinking at all, but if I did, it would have only been a glass of wine, so I was in no way drunk. I excused myself and told my friends that I'm just popping to the bathroom, back in a minute, and off I went. So the layout may have changed. I haven't been in many years, but at the time, the bathroom layout was as follows. There was a door you had to push, a short corridor, another door you had to push open, and then you were in the bathroom. Both doors were heavy and swung closed behind you once you'd gotten through them. The bathroom was a smallish room, but nice as far as bathrooms go. There were 3 empty cubicles, all with the doors neatly open. I went into the right-hand side toilet and closed the door. As I was sat using the toilet, sorry, I know, I began to hear what sounded like whispering behind me. Behind and perhaps just off the right. It made me turn around, but I just thought to myself it must be something coming from the room next door. The whispering continued, but I couldn't really make out what was being said. Surprisingly, I was chilled and didn't think anything of it. It was just someone in the room next door, right? The next thing was knock, knock, knock. 3 pretty loud knocks rapped on my toilet door. Now, I'm in a pretty confused mindset. I thought one of my friends must have come into the bathroom and decided to knock on my door for some strange reason. I was finished using the toilet and opened up the door expecting to see my friend, or someone, but there was nobody there. The room was completely empty with all of the cubicles just as they were when I entered, with the doors still open. There was absolutely nobody in the room with me. Plus, if someone had come in, knocked on my door and ran out again, I would have heard the door and the footsteps, but there was nothing, just silence. And why would somebody do that anyway? The hotel is pretty fancy. They wouldn't just let people run amok in it. So at this point, I was puzzled, but still surprisingly chilled. I think my mind just went to a rational place at the time. But the whispering? What was that about? I returned to my table and asked my friends if they'd knocked on my toilet door, and they all said no. They were kind of freaked out and didn't want to use the bathroom alone after that, which I guess is understandable. Terrified at night at my late grandma's house. So this is a true story that happened in 2014, and I still think about it all the time. My grandma passed away on New Year's Eve in 2008, going into 2009, and the house that she'd lived in her whole life. She was an absolutely amazing lady who'd do anything for anyone, but was really ill in her final years with Parkinson's. The last time I saw her was in Christmas of 2008, and she was gone a few days after I traveled back to London. I always wish I'd stayed with her longer. If only I'd known that that would have been the last time that I'd see her. After she passed away, my parents moved into her house and sold theirs. It's a pretty small dormer bungalow with all the bedrooms upstairs. Every Christmas, myself, sisters, and brother would travel back home to the north and stay over for a few days. As there isn't a whole lot of room, I opted to sleep in the living room on a pull-out sofa bed, which I'd done many times before. To be fair, the house has always had kind of creepy vibes. I pretty much grew up at my grandma's house, and she would look after us whilst my parents were at work. So night one, I wasn't thinking anything creepy or scary at all, although I did leave a small lamp on. I'm so used to living in London, with the constant noises and bright night skies. Up north in this remote village, it's pitch black at night and eerily quiet. It can be hard to sleep. It's just a bit too quiet. I noticed the room was very cold, although the real coal fire had been on and was slowly ebbing away, but I slept fine, nothing really unusual. Night 2. Just the same as the other night, really. The room was a bit chilly, but nothing out of the ordinary. I was pretty tired after running around playing with my nephew all day, so thought maybe I'd have a deeper sleep if I turned the small lamp off that I'd had on previously. I wasn't scared of the dark or anything like that. I really didn't think much of it. Over the years, I'd slept over in that room loads of times. So I fell asleep around 11 p.m. maybe. I can't quite remember the exact time. Around 2 a.m. I suddenly woke up out of nowhere with a sudden jolt of absolute fear and terror running through me. I was hyperventilating and felt so hot that I was sweating. But as I jolted awake in fear, I could feel someone was holding onto my hand too. I slept on my right side with my right arm and hand kind of turned up on the pillow next to me. And I could feel a hand in my hand, holding it. My God, I've never been so terrified in all of my life. I mustered all of the energy I had, jumped out of bed in the pitch-black room and scrambled for the light switch. Obviously, there was no one there. I wasn't dreaming anything before I woke up, but it felt so real. I felt a hand. Plus, I wasn't feeling ill or anything. What I felt was just sheer terror. This has never happened before or since. I didn't sleep the rest of the night and was knackered the following day. We had a family meal booked at a restaurant, and I told them what happened. I expected them to laugh at me, but my mom and dad looked at each other and said a few weird things had happened since they moved in, including a glass that likes to move by itself fairly frequently at the odd bump in the night. My mom won't go downstairs at night unless she really needs to. So, if it was my grandma who came to pay me a visit, I'm sure that she wasn't trying to frighten me, but geez, I've never slept in that room again and never will. In the garage of the same house when we were younger, my little sister once said that she saw the ghost of a man wearing a military uniform. I'll have to ask her about that one. Noise from the back. Many moons ago, when I was in my late 20s, I was a waitress. I worked mostly nights. I had 2 small kids, and we lived in a pretty big place with my aunt. Yep, the very same. My car had broken down, and my aunt was taking me to and from work. The road to and from work wasn't too long, but it was curvy and narrow and very dark at night, even when the moon was bright. The trees were close to the road and grew in an almost tunnel throughout most of the road. This one particular night, it was after midnight by the time that we were heading home. My aunt is driving and I'm in the passenger seat, counting out my tips. I hear some rustling coming from the back floorboards and asked H about it. At first, she hadn't heard anything, but eventually she did. Our initial thought was kittens. We had small kittens at the house, and they were kind of bad at jumping into vehicles anytime the door was open. We pulled to the side of the road when we came to a spot that was wide enough so we could have a look. The car was a two-door, so we had to push the seats up to take a look in the back. There were some newspapers in the back floorboards, and it was these that we had heard rustling. We picked everything up but didn't find anything. Next thought, a breeze from our window. We had them down maybe an inch or two. Maybe it was disturbing the papers. No big deal, right? So we got back in the car and continued on. When we started hearing it again, it was quite a bit louder and bigger somehow. This is much more than a breeze. But we try to ignore it until something starts hitting the back of my seat. Not real hard, almost like a small kid lightly kicking my seat. I look at my aunt and said, "Something is hitting my seat." She thought it was maybe just trying to pull her leg and didn't believe me. Then it got hard enough that she could actually see me bouncing from the impact. So I, being the not very smart person that I am, decide to unbuckle my seatbelt and take a peek to see what's going on. No one ever accused me of having all my dogs barking. My aunt slowed down a bit. Remember, we can get off the road again, no room. And I'm on my knees on the passenger seat facing the back. The back of my seat is still being banged on, but I couldn't see anything. I leaned over the back of the seat to get a better look when, bang! The seat was hit so hard, the locking mechanism that keeps it in place was broken. The whole seat was rammed up into the dash and it slung me into the dashboard hard. I was split open behind my right ear and ended up in the front floorboard. Damn. Of course, my aunt hit the brakes and we were stopped in the middle of the road, which is at least as dangerous as what was going on inside the car. I just scrambled back into the seat, buckled my seatbelt, and told my aunt to fucking floor it, get me home. We were just a couple of miles from home, and we took those curves like a race car. As soon as we roared into the driveway, we jumped out and ran to the house. If I'm not mistaken, my aunt didn't even turn the motor off. It may have just been us running out of gas and it just sitting there. I do know that I didn't shut the door, and H swears that neither did she. But they were both closed and the doors locked the next morning. Luckily, she had an extra key. But my happy ass never got in that car ever again. Another story from someone in the back seat. This story happened about a year later. The person in the back seat was still quite frequently in my mom's and aunt's cars. They became used to it. As I said, occasionally they could see him in their rearview mirror, but usually he could only be seen from outside the cars. On this occasion, Mom and my aunt were taking a bit longer ride and were, as usual, listening to their radio pretty loudly and singing along. Their ride had taken them past their paternal grandmother's gravesite. Now, y'all need a little bit of background here. Grandmother, my great-grandma, was a bad mamma jamma. Everyone said she was a witch. This being the South, anyone even remotely different was called a witch. So that makes me, kind of never mind it. However, this woman was into devil worship. She was not a Satanist. There's a huge difference. No, She was into animal sacrifice, blood rituals, all things ugly. Trust me, she wasn't a good person. She detested my grandmother, the lady who married and had children with her son, because my grandmother wouldn't take any of her shit, and other things which I won't get into. So, on her deathbed, and this was witnessed by several people, including a doctor, mind you, she swore that she would come back through one of Granny's children or grandchildren, and that she would never allow them to live in peace. Also, I'll mention that my pawpaw, her son, wasn't like her, but his sisters and father were. Is this clear as mud? Okay, on with the story. On this bright, beautiful day, the road Mom and my aunt were on was really twisty and windy and hilly. They knew the roads pretty well. They traveled them quite often, and didn't think anything unusual would happen today. They were wrong. Laughing and singing, all was hunky-dory until they passed this graveyard. They've always gotten chills passing here, but nothing really happened to them before. This day, just as they were going past, they actually felt like something got in the car with them, suddenly. They got cold on a summer day. The radio suddenly cut out, and they said they smelled what they assumed was roadkill, rotten meat, basically. Then something weighed them down and held them against the seats. Neither could move at all. They even had trouble taking a deep breath or saying anything, because the weight on their chest was so heavy. Then Mom, she was driving, suddenly felt her foot getting heavier and heavier on the gas pedal. The car was going faster and faster on this winding, twisting road. She couldn't take her foot off the gas. Couldn't move even her other foot to the brake. Couldn't move their hands, not even their head. Only their eyes could move. The car was going so fast it was starting to shudder and shake. However, they were kept on the road, went around the curve safely, and had no accident. Mom was able to glance into the rearview mirror and saw that the passenger was with them again. Suddenly, after what felt like ages, the weight was lifted from them and they could control both their body and the car. The cold and the smell were gone, and it was like nothing had happened at all. Of course, they were terribly shaken and had to pull over and get out of the car. They have no idea how they were able to come off that road safely, except to assume that their passenger helped them somehow. Now, obviously, some of y'all are going to call this bullshit, and that's okay. I was raised on the story, and still find it hard to believe. However, I will say that I've heard this story from each of them more times than I can count. Neither of them have ever had the slightest change in the story. And, to this day, neither of them will even tell me where the road is. I know it isn't too far from where I grew up. Obviously, I can't even tell you for sure what country it's in. No one in the family will even speak her name, and even the ones who once knew where she was buried swear they can't remember when asked. They'll shut down any questions immediately. Any and all records that they have were destroyed, and back then nothing was kept outside of the family. Someone in the back seat. This experience happened to my aunt and mom before I was even thought of. My mom and dad were just starting to date at this time. I will tell it as if it was told to me the many times over the years that it has. My mom and aunt did everything together. They even worked together. On their days off, they just get in my mom's car and just ride around. We still do this, by the way, one of my favorite things. One particular day, they got several calls on the CB radio. This was back in the 60s. from friends or family that they'd pass, asking them who they were all riding around with. Everybody knew that they never took others on their rides. Of course, it was just the two of them. They didn't understand why people were getting upset and asking them why they would lie about something so insignificant as to who was in the car. My dad even called on the CB and got really upset because they didn't ask him to go for their ride. It was a sister's thing, and yet they had some other dude with them. He assumed it was my aunt's boyfriend or something. So my great aunt ended up behind them, really small town in the south, and asked them, "Can you all pull over and come back to my car and help me with something?" Kind of confused but willing to help, they said, "Of course," and they did so. When they got back from my great aunt's car, she said, "Is something going on? Why don't you want anyone to know you have somebody in your car?" Thinking maybe they were being forced or some such, right? Mom, getting pissed at this point. "For crying out loud, no one is in the damn car, look!" And turned around and pointed, only to see some guy in their back seat. They swore he wasn't in there before and that he must have snuck or sneaked in when they were getting gas or something. But they didn't see him at all. They figured he must have been down in the floor or something, hiding. So they radio over to get some guys to come check it out. This whole time, the guy didn't even fidget. Some big buff guys, friends of the family, came over and figured that they'd give this guy a, what's it for sneaking into this car, and went up to pull the dude out. When they got to the car, he wasn't there. They came back to ask where he went, but looking back at the car, he was still right there. One of the guys actually got into the back seat where you could plainly see this dude and no one was in there. From outside the car, you could see both of them in the back seat, but on the inside was only him. Now, growing up hearing this, I started to think, this has to have grown in the retelling, right? This is purely impossible. So, at different times, I contacted each person that I could who were involved in this, and they each told me the exact same story from their point of view. I can't explain any more than they could. This only ever happened in their cars. It happened in my aunt's car, too. And only if it was one or both of them in the car. This was the first time that it happened, but it did happen several times after. The dude could never be seen inside the car, only from the outside. A phone call with Sandy. So to set the scene, I was about 7 years old when this happened. But I remember parts of it like it was yesterday. Also, this story is told often in my family, so I can confidently tell it from all other points of views. My parents both worked at this time. My dad was a firefighter, and he has 24 48-hour shifts. And so my eldest sister, 14 at the time, was often left to babysit. There were 7 of us, including the eldest ranging from age 14 to 16. Also, our grandmother lived just across the parking lot from us. My sisters were calling the request line to request a song to be played on the radio. Yep, I'm aging myself here. And my sister, brother, and I were jumping on Mom and Dad's bed, just down the hall from the living room. Now, we had an extension phone upstairs, and we had smaller ones that we were known to listen in on phone conversations with. So when somebody picked up the extension phone while my sister was on her phone in the living room, she assumed it was us. It happened several times, but it would hang up when my eldest sister yelled, "Hang it up!" Finally, she got irate and called us out by name. When she called our names, we came out of our parents' room down the hall, where there was no extension. Obviously, this struck her as weird. but she just figured that she either imagined the sound of the phone picking up or it was a glitch. Once she had all of us sitting in the floor in front of her watching a movie on TV, and she started to call again. This time, when the upstairs phone was picked up, she ignored it. But then she heard breathing sounds over the line. She said, "Hello?" a couple times. Then she hung up the phone. A little freaked out, she called her aunt to see if she could explain it. On the phone with H, it happened again. That's the aunt. But just sounded like an open line. She said it was probably just a glitch, but to call it back if it kept happening. Well, it did. They called again, and the line was picked up. "Who is it?" And a voice said, "This is Sandy." "Where are you, Sandy?" And the voice said, "Well, I'm just right here." She thought about it was one of us, maybe, and said so. Said it couldn't be us, because we're all right here. Then the voice on the line giggled and said, "I'm still here." They spoke with each other and told us to gather, all of us, and just go to Granny's house now. I remember running to Granny's place in the middle of the night barefooted. The aunt told her mom, our other grandma, that somebody was in our apartment and to call the police and tell them to meet us there. The police and everyone else, my mom and dad by now, went in and searched our apartment top to bottom. No one was found, but the upstairs phone was off the hook. The police figured that either we played a joke, or someone had been in the apartment with us. They left, perhaps. So after making sure the windows and doors were locked up, they all met us outside in front of the apartment to talk. The one policeman looked up at the window facing the parking area, the bedroom I shared with one of my sisters, incidentally, and saw a man standing in the window watching them. When the policeman pointed him out to the others, the man just waved and turned away out of sight. They all ran back in to do another search, keeping someone at all exit points to catch anyone running out. No one was found. Was it my imagination? When I was around the age of 3 or 4, by the way, I'm 22 now, I lived in a decent-sized apartment with my parents. My mother was starting to go to Christian church and becoming more spiritual as well, and my father was not really into those type of things. So during those times as a kid, I didn't know anything about the spiritual world. But one day I was playing in my parents' room, and one of my toys fell underneath our cabinets. As I crouched down to pick it up, I felt like I needed to get lower to see more of what was underneath the cabinet for some reason. As I look, I see 2 eyes looking at me from the shadows, and they were yellowish eyes but with no pupils, and you couldn't see the whites of the eyes. But I didn't feel fear at all. And as a naive kid, I thought we had a pet hiding there, but now that I remember, I never had any pets during my childhood. After I walked away that day, I remembered about the eyes and decided to bring it food because I thought it might be hungry. But as I look under the cabinet, there was nothing there. No eyes, just shadows. But my attention span was short, so I just left eating the snacks I brought. But over the years, as I started growing and maturing, I keep wondering what it was. Because now that I think about it, the space underneath the cabinet was not even that big. I would say 1.5 feet deep and 2.5 feet wide. Which, if there actually was an animal there, I would at least see the body. Story from a non-believer. Why I'm changing my opinion. I've always been somewhat skeptical of ghosts. I've always had people around me who attributed things to ghosts, even when a logical explanation was available. My opinion has begun to change. I began living alone. No big deal. I'm not afraid of the house settling or bumps or bangs. I have dogs and they knock stuff over all the time. I recently got an Oculus. I cleared the room and made my sort of play space. I also keep my dogs out of the room so they don't get hit or get stepped on by accident while I'm playing. So I'm playing my game, the TV was off, and after playing for a while, I noticed sound on my TV is on as well as the speaker. I take my headset off, look around, and turn both off. I started playing again, and then I noticed my watch alarm going off. It's a digital watch that I've never set an alarm for. I rarely wear it. It was sitting in the drawer. So I think, okay, my Oculus is somehow sending a signal and these are somehow being affected by it. I start playing and have this weird feeling like someone is in there. I look over my shoulder. You can tap the side of the Oculus and the screen shows you your surroundings using your camera. I don't see anything, but I see a big dog looking at something, not me. I scanned the room and nothing. I started playing again, my dog after all, but I can't shake the feeling. So I check again this time, taking my headset off. My dog is still looking behind me. There's nothing there but open space. I put the headset up for the night because it just felt that weird. I've lived in this house for about 7 years and never felt this feeling before here. Fast forward to yesterday. I'm playing with some friends in my Oculus. I hear my TV turn on and my friends also hear it. This time it was a TV in another room. So I turn it off. I see the controller in the middle of the floor. It's a guest room where the TV is rarely used. The remote is always directly below the mounted TV on the console. It's just sat there for months without moving. I keep getting the feeling of being watched, but not always, just intermittently. I don't know what to think. I've always been skeptical about ghosts, but I can't explain the remote. Maybe somehow the Oculus messes with electronics, but looking online, I haven't found any proof of this happening to anyone else. I'll update on any more occurrences. Story from a Non-Believer, Part 2. I'm back with more odd things, but not while playing. So, to preface this cannot be caused by some interference or by my dogs. My Oculus is on the other side of the house, shut off. I have cameras set up in my house. There is one pointed at the front doorway, 2 exterior, and 1 in my room. Today I was at work. While at work, I closed the door to my bedroom so my dogs didn't go there. I always keep them out of the bedroom unless I'm home. So I'm at work, and I get a notification that there's movement caught on my camera at home. I think, oh, maybe it's my dogs. But I see it's from my bedroom. So I begin thinking someone broke in or something. So I checked the feed. So I checked the still image that it captured. I see nothing. I brush it off, maybe a bug or something activated it. 2 minutes pass, and I get another notification of movement again. I check, nothing. I watch the feed again, this time for 5 minutes. I don't see anything. I begin to think maybe some lights are just reflecting or some form of light is causing the camera to think that there's movement. As I'm watching the feed, I'm trying to look for some source of light. I have double blackout curtains, so they block light quite well. I have the lights off and no fans, and HVAC is running during the day when I'm not home. bored of watching the feed and just shut it off because I didn't see anything alarming. Within a minute, I get another notification of movement. I watch the feed, put my earbuds in, and listen as closely as I can. It's quiet, but like you'd expect an empty house to be. I watch again for 10 minutes or so. I debated calling my neighbor and having him check it out, but I decided not to. Usually any loud or odd occurrence would cause my dogs to bark, but I haven't heard them once on the feed or gotten a sound notification, just ones for movement. I finally stopped watching, thinking maybe the settings for movement notifications are just too strict. So I raised the tolerance to high. I closed the app, and in 5 minutes I got another notification. I'm at work, so I didn't notice the notification right away. I checked my phone 15 minutes later. I have 6 notifications for movement. I check all the stills. They all look identical, nothing out of the place. Nothing different from each picture. I decided something's gotta be up with this camera. I get a few more notifications before I'm off of work. When I get home, I check the room, and nothing changed from that morning. Everything is as I left it. Of course, I walk in and get a movement notification. I checked it and saw myself in the still photo. I test the tolerance by laying in my bed and turning over. The camera does not notify me. So the tolerance changed to high doesn't notify me by this movement, which in my opinion is more than slight. I did a full turn and nothing. So I don't know how it was getting set off earlier in the day. I have never changed the tolerance settings before now, and I've never gotten false movement notifications either. This camera has been installed for about 1.5 years as well. I don't know what could have set it off. None of the other cameras notified except once or twice for my dogs laying in the front door. I'm stumped on what could explain it. Now, I'm logically minded, so I've been trying to come up with something and I just can't. There's nothing in the images and nothing that's been moved. It's just my camera notifying me starting at 1:03 p.m. to 3:53 p.m. It's odd. I can't come up with an explanation as to why I got 16 movement notifications in those hours. B&B encounter in 1998. These events happened in the winter of 1998. My first and only experience of this kind. We were driving, returning from a 1,000-kilometer, 600-mile trip. Our plan was to stop halfway, have dinner, find a place to stay. We left rather late, and being winter, it was getting dark and cold. Not much visibility as it was foggy. We decided to stop at this small town, no more than 1,000 inhabitants. The few motels were booked out, and we had to keep driving. However, just out of town was this mid-19th century 2-story Victorian-style house, converted to a B&B, and it had vacancy. We parked in the driveway and made some inquiries. We were greeted by a short man in his mid-40s, wearing reading glasses and what seemed like a wig. I imagined that he would be the owner. "How can I help you?" "Please come in, it's getting cold. We have the fireplace on," he said. "We're after a room for the night and some dinner. Do you have any rooms available? And how much for that night?" "The house has 5 rooms, all vacant tonight, and cost $200 a night, including breakfast." I looked at my girlfriend. Our budget was $40 for a motel room, and $200 was way too much, even though it was probably worth it since the decoration and furniture were done to the period, and the house did have a romantic feeling. "Sorry, this is above our budget. We'll need to find somewhere else," I replied. I understand. For you to consider, we have a small 3-bedroom cottage next door. It used to be the caretaker's, and it's empty tonight. You can have it all to yourselves, and we can make it for $90. We accepted this offer since driving any further could be dangerous. We were shown this weatherboard cottage, which had a small veranda at the front. Upon entering, there was a large corridor with the main bedroom on your left, the other bedrooms on the right, a small lounge room in the middle of the house, followed by a kitchen and a large bathroom in the back. The man lit the fireplace, showed us around, and said goodnight. For dinner, we ate some leftover sandwiches and fruit that we had and went to bed. Gecko. We couldn't find any blankets, which was odd given the temperature outside was below freezing. At night, I woke up and decided to go to the toilet. As I opened the door, I saw this 5-foot woman, early 50s, wearing an old-style long black dress, dark hair pulled up, staring right at me. It was wary and somehow knew it was a ghost. I jumped, went back to the bedroom, closed the door, woke up my girlfriend, and told her I just saw a ghost. We both covered ourselves and heads underneath everything, and interestingly went back to sleep straight away. Around 6:30 a.m. we woke up, had a shower, packed up our things, and went to the main house. The man greeted us. "Are you ready for breakfast? But before, if you're interested, I can give you a tour of the house." Since he was almost blocking the way to the dining room and his arms were showing the stairs, we ended up seeing the whole house. It was creepy somehow. After breakfast, we paid and left. "Jez, that man was strange, didn't you find?" I said to my girlfriend. "Which man are you talking about?" she replied. "The owner, who else?" "I never saw any man. The owner was a woman." She described the woman and had nothing to do with the man. Better forget this whole episode, we concluded. Never mention any of this to our friends, as they'll probably think we're crazy, and we just laughed it off. Around 2016, I remembered this story and did a Google search and found this B&B. To my surprise, in the About Us section, there was a picture of the original owner, a mid-aged couple, and the woman was the owner, wearing the same dress and with the same hairdo, exactly like I saw her. Gave me goosebumps. That's the end of today's stories. My gecko is all the way across the house, and I do apologize if you hear him interrupting. And a quick shout out to Perfectly Imperfect. Thanks for always dropping those comments. Helps us on the algorithm and helps us feel good about our work. As always, see you later. Have a great night. Greetings from Paranormal M. Today's stories are a little bit more exciting than other days. Buckle up and enjoy the ride. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to receive a dose of unexplained wonders. My experience in a haunted mansion, based on a true story, by Uncle Perry and Aunt Renee. Back in 1984, I lived in a 130-year-old 18-room furnished Victorian mansion in the rural part of South Carolina. It was owned by the same family for all those years, but hard times fell on the family, and they had to start renting out the place. The house was in disrepair and desperately needed some TLC. For example, there were still some animal stalls in the basement from back when they used to keep livestock to slaughter for the family's meals. Also, the kitchen looked like it was renovated in the 1970s. It had yellow linoleum floors, and the walls were also painted yellow. The appliances were likewise from that era. It probably hadn't been inspected by the county in many years. To say that it was outdated is a massive understatement. It consisted of 3 floors and a dark, creepy basement and attic. According to the owners, it had a deep, rich history. In fact, it was even told that Thomas Jefferson had slept in the same bed that I was sleeping in. Most of the furniture from that era, it had a beautiful spiral staircase that led to the bedrooms on the second floor. The bedroom door across the hall from my bedroom had a hinged bar lock on the outside. It also had knots in it that looked like a demonic face. Whenever you walked into that room in the middle of summer, it felt like an icebox. The windows were painted shut and there were no fans or AC. It was weird as hell. I had a kind of a creepy vibe about this room, and I wouldn't go in there. One night when I had to go to the bathroom, I stepped out of the bedroom and I heard footsteps behind me. I looked behind me, didn't see anyone. I freaked out and ran toward the bathroom, terrified. At the time, I heard footsteps running down the stairs from the attic toward me. I made it to the bathroom out of breath. There was no one to come to my aid. After hunkering down, I don't know how long, I finally worked up the courage to return to my bedroom for some much-needed rest. The next day, my girlfriend, Renee, came over to stay with me. She's a very sensitive and spiritual kind of person and wanted to tour the house. As I walked her through the place, she pointed out spiritual hotspots in certain areas. The attic, the basement, and the room on the second floor across from my room. She said the attic was where the servants used to reside, and she still could feel their presence. The basement where most intense anger was coming from. The room across from my bedroom was where an old woman had died years ago. One night when she was staying over, she went into the basement to do laundry. She went to grab the laundry from the dryer, and she felt as if someone was watching her. She spun around and saw what looked like angry slaves from the Civil War era. They slowly crept towards her with retribution in their eyes. She panicked and ran upstairs to the bedroom and said to me, "I'm done with this place. I'm out of here." I said, "What happened?" She said, "I saw something in the basement. It looked like a shadow, but I can't be positive. It scared the shit out of me." I replied, "What the hell are you talking about? I'm not going back down there. If you want the laundry done, you go down there." I said, "Fine, I will," and I went downstairs. When I got to the basement, I put the laundry in the hamper and started carrying it up the stairs, when I felt something following behind me up the stairs. I turned around and saw something following me. It was gray and cloudy and getting closer. I ran up the stairs and into the bedroom. Renee asked me if I saw it. I said, "Yeah, I did." Suddenly, we heard a knock at the bedroom door. We froze in terror. We saw a fog-like substance seep underneath the door. She backed away, screaming. I charged the door and threw it open, but there was nothing there. I yelled into the hallway. "Come and get me, you fucking pussy!" Renee exclaimed. "What the fuck are you doing?" I told her that I was going to stand up to this bullshit. She grabbed a crucifix off the wall and took her place by my side. We waited in an anxiety-filled anticipation for what was to come next. After waiting for what felt like hours, we went to bed. The next day, I went to the attic to get some things I stashed there when I first moved in. As I climbed the stairs, I heard movement. I paused to listen closer, thinking it was probably a raccoon or some other small animal. But it sounded like someone walking around, almost pacing back and forth. I crept up the creaking steps to the attic door and listened. I could hear talking, but it wasn't English. It was almost a mumbling, but I could tell that it was a different language. I reached for the doorknob, and it was ice cold. Abruptly, the doorknob turned on its own and flew open so hard that it smashed into the wall. My natural reaction was to get into a defensive posture. I was ready to kick the intruder's ass. I looked around the huge multi-roomed loft. Dust was flying everywhere. It was obvious that no one other than me had been up there in quite a while. Several pieces of furniture from a bygone era were covered in sheets. I located the boxes I was looking for, but they had been moved from where I had last put them. The dust on the floor showed that they had been slid to a different position. I looked underneath the sheets just to make sure that there were no trespassers hidden underneath them. I found no one. Also, there were no fingerprints in the dust, human or animal. I scratched my head in bewilderment but shrugged it off. I grabbed my things and went back downstairs. I asked Renee if she had been in the attic. She said no. I told her what had happened. She got a little bit freaked out. At that point, she stated that the house is haunted. She asked me if I knew the history of the house. I said, I didn't think about it until now. I'll definitely have to ask the landlord about it when I deliver the next rent check. Later on, while we were watching Amazing Race in the living room, we heard some noises on the floor above us. It was the pitter-patter of little feet scampering back and forth. We looked at each other horrified. I jumped up, bounded up the stairs, 2 steps at a time. When I reached the landing, I saw small, wet footprints going up and down the hallway, like that of a child. I tracked the footsteps back to the bathroom. When I got there, the water was running in the clawfoot tub. When I reached to turn the water off, I saw a small boy laying in the bottom of the tub, submerged in water. His eyes were open, but staring up blankly. He was blue and badly bloated. I screamed, "Holy shit!" I stumbled backwards and ran into the sink in horror, knocking several things to the floor. Renee heard the commotion and ran upstairs. When she got there, she asked, "What the hell happened? Are you okay?" All I could do at this point was point at the bathtub with a shocked look on my face. She looked and saw the boy. Renee said that she saw the boy on her initial tour of this house. Thinking he was just a boy, she didn't say anything about him. She turned off the water, drained the tub, and the boy disappeared. As we made our way down the hallway back to the living room, the demonic-looking door across from our bedroom flew open with a crash. Startled, we ran toward the room. When we got to the doorway, there was a cold wind whipping around like a tornado. Furniture was getting thrown everywhere. In the middle of the room was an apparition of an old, crackling hag. She was levitating and reaching out her long, talon-like hands toward us. Unexpectedly, the door slammed in our face. We looked at each other in utter horror. We simultaneously said, "Nope!" ran to the car, fearing for our lives. I immediately drove to the landlord's house to break the lease. When I explained why, he didn't act surprised and told me that he's always had a hard time keeping tenants longer than a month. I asked what's the story about the place. The landlord went on to say, with the house being so old, there have been many deaths inside of it. He said the actual number is unknown, but there seems to be 4 main areas that the spirits inhabit. The basement was where slaves from the Civil War were imprisoned, beaten, and starved to death. In the attic, a chambermaid had died giving birth as a result of an unwanted pregnancy. In the bathroom, a boy had been drowned after slipping into the tub, banging his head. And in the demonic door bedroom, a crazy grandmother was locked in that room because the family thought that she was possessed. When a priest was brought in to do an exorcism, it went sideways and she died as a result. I asked the landlord why he didn't tell me about this in the first place. He said, "If I did, would you have signed that lease?" I said, "Of course not." He had no issue with giving me my security deposit back, but kept the last month's rent I paid up front. He said it's going to take at least that long to get someone else to move in. From now on, I know that there are going to be certain questions I ask every landlord before I sign a lease. Haunting at work. Not so long ago, I waited tables at one of the oldest restaurants in LA. It's called Tam O'Shanter. Look it up if you don't believe me. It's one of those old historical gems that even most LA people don't know about. Hell, I grew up just a few miles from the place and always called it that log cabin restaurant. It was one of Walt Disney's favorite haunts before Disney was a thing, and it was frequented by actors of the 1920s and 30s. Well, when I got hired, the first story I ever heard about were the ghosts of Tam O'Shanter. It's a huge restaurant in Atwater Village in Los Feliz, and from the outside it looks like a quaint cottage. The inside is large and expansive, with a huge pub and bar in the front, and 3 different rooms in the back. It's rumored that it was once connected to a drugstore that burned down in a fire, and several people were killed in the process. Then, there's also a massive kitchen, a wine cellar down a dark hall, and an upstairs with a male and female locker room, and an office and storage room. The place is massive, sprawling, and quite honestly, it's both as warm and inviting as it is creepy and sinister. This story is about the whispers. It wasn't long into training when I started hearing about the alleged ghost stories. A young blonde boy that would come out and run late at night in the large and expansive room farthest to the back. About the woman in black that would walk the hall upstairs late at night, and the cleaning crew that would quit with no explanation. About the pots and pans that would sometimes shake on their own. About the people who died in the restaurant throughout the 100-year run. About the salt and pepper shakers that would mysteriously turn the tops of themselves off. About the chandeliers that would move, and about the sandwich carver who had been working there for decades and refused to go back to the dining room. And there was more, a lot more. While I've had some experiences with other odd things, dreams and intuition, I've never had any experience in the paranormal. I never really was big on the idea of ghosts. I still think most otherly things can be explained, but I must say my time at Tam, especially that first month, made me stop and reconsider my belief in the supernatural. This is the first part in a series of multiple incidents that happened to me. The first thing is the bulk of it happened to me in that first month, and seemingly dropped off a night after closing, after I vowed that I would quit Tam if anything else crazy happened to me. For me, it started with the whispers. I would be working in the pub, and I would hear someone call out to me, "Jackson." I suppose whisper isn't the right word. No, it was more like someone calling my name to get my attention. Jackson. The voice was nondescript and neutral. It sounded male, that much I was pretty sure of, like a nondescript white male voice. Jackson. I would spin around and say, "Yeah?" to the table a few feet away. They would look at me funny and would kind of just, "We didn't call you," and they'd politely smile. I think the first couple of days I just chalked it up to me hearing things in the noise of the pub. But it started happening more and more often. I'm talking once each hour or every other hour. "Jackson." Always just once, and I would turn around and either look around and respond to tables that had never called me. Then I thought maybe the stress of work was making me hear things. Until one day a coworker of mine, Ashley, spelled with an E at the end, said, "I keep hearing someone call my name." And then another time of mine, Brooke, and then another of mine, a good friend, Dominic. What we all had in common is that we were all new. Dominic started a couple months before, Ashley a week or two before, and Brooke and I started the same week together. Some of the other staff swore by other more peculiar things, while others witnessed nothing. Well, by the second or third week at Tam, things started ramping up with me. It was now once or twice an hour, every hour, and I ignored it. Thought maybe it was just the new medication. Well, one day early in the morning, I was an opener. Part of my job was to get silverware and make roll-ups for the lighter and more casual style dining in the pub. I walked to the back near the dishwasher to retrieve the silverware. Suddenly, and right into my right ear, the voice said, "Jackson." The same type of way I'd been hearing it for the last couple of weeks, but more of a whisper. Except this time, right next to my ear. I spun around to say, "Fuck," to the person that I imagined would be there for startling me. Except there wasn't anyone. It's like the kitchen was empty, but it wasn't. But there was no one in the back part next to the dishwashing pit. I walked a few meters to my left and to my right, thinking I would catch the person playing this trick on me. No one. So I still didn't really think anything of it and thought it was just one of the bussers or runners playing a trick. So I gathered up the utensils, made my roll-ups, and began to think about what had happened more. I was beginning to question my insanity. I think you had to write sanity. Am I starting to hear voices? I wanted to ask other people about the voices all the time, but I also didn't want them to think the new guy was going crazy either. So I happened upon Michelle, who was a sales manager for the company. She was always sweet and bubbly, but she didn't interact as much with the servers because she was mostly in the office. I thought asking Michelle would be a safer bet. "Hey Michelle, I have a question for you, and it might sound kind of weird." "Yeah, what's up?" she replied. With hesitation and a soft tone, I asked her, Do you ever hear voices in here?" She gave out this soft laugh, without an inclination of fear. Her laughter made me laugh and sobered me up a little. How ridiculous I must have sounded. How it sounded so crazy. She was laughing about it. It's what she said and did next that made me stop laughing. "You know, it's so funny you say that. I have heard somebody calling my name before. And you know what's so funny? It happened to me right there." My heart sank and smile evaporated as she pointed. "Yeah, it happened right there." What Michelle didn't know is that she was pointing in the exact same spot I'd been standing when I heard them say my name. Literally at the same fucking spot. I wish I could say this all that just happened. Fortunately, there's more. The Haunting of Tam O'Shanter. Alternate, it seems. Its name is Tam O'Shanter, and it's one of the oldest restaurants in LA. The funny thing is, most people, even from the city, have never even heard of it, even though most people know it's a sister restaurant to Laurie's Steakhouse in Beverly Hills. Tam O'Shanter preceded Laurie's by several decades. Oh, and yeah, if you're wondering, there's any relationship between that Lawry's and Lawry's seasoning salt that most Americans have come to know, there is. The same family that created Lawry's seasoning salt started their business with Tam O'Shanter. Because Tam O'Shanter was a favorite of the late Walt Disney, we would get many enthusiastic fans and tours. Yes, tours of the restaurant. I never knew Disney and Walt Disney fans existed until I started working there. In any event, as I stated in a previous post, I never thought so much about the paranormal. I mean, I had had dreams and maybe what some could be considered as ESP episodes as a child, but never anything having to do with quote-unquote ghosts. I'd like to think I'm a pretty rational person. While I love a good ghost story, I've always thought most ghost stories can be explained, but after my time at Tam O'Shanter, I'm not so sure anymore. For a while, I thought I was crazy, or perhaps it was a medication, but now I just don't anymore. In my last post, I talked about the whispers that plagued me almost immediately after I had started. they weren't really whispers, and it was always the same male and nondescript voice. Well, I wish I could say the voice was the only thing that happened to me, but it wasn't. One weekday morning, I was scheduled to open for lunch. Arrivals at 10:30 a.m. It's not like the place is empty at that time. It's not. But there's only a fraction of the staff there at that time versus the dinner shift. There's only one server on the floor. To create a mental picture of Tam O'Shanter consists of a front entrance that spills into the pub. The pub looks and feels like an English pub, with tables and a few cozy booths for seating. If you walk further toward the back, you come to the main dining room with about 10 tables. Look to the left, and there's a nook with about 10 tables or so as well. That's the tartan room. If you look to your right, there's another room with about 15 tables. If you walk further, you encounter a small service bar to your right and then 6 to 7 steps leading up to a huge back dining room. This was called the Prince Charlie Room. There's gotta be at least another 20 tables in there. The Prince Charlie Room was only open on weekends and holidays. And, well, the whole month of December, as this was the busiest time for the restaurant. Now that I've laid out a picture, let me get back to the opening shift. My job as an opening server was to make roll-ups for the pubs, which got quite chaotic and busy about an hour after lunch each day. Well, to make roll-ups, you need silverware. Sometimes there wouldn't be any in the dish pit, so I would raid the polished silverware in the Prince Charlie room. That particular morning, it must have been my 3rd week at TAM, and by then I knew that if there wasn't any silverware in the dish pit, I should go to the Prince Charlie room. There was always something about that room that didn't quite feel right. It could be noon and 80 degrees, and yet that room still felt dark and cold. It didn't help that the only windows were in the back of the room. There were also these old paintings of some famous Scottish poets and young princes that adorned the room. I don't know, but I always found them creepy. Especially the picture of a young, toddlerish boy. It didn't help a few decades of employees swore that they would see a young blonde toddler run across the room late at night. One employee who had been there over 20 years flat out refused to enter that room, regardless of the time of day. He hadn't gone up there in years. Well, that particular day, I needed silverware. There was none, and I was new and needed to make roll-ups. I had already been dealing with the voices, or the voice, that continued to call out my name during service. But I'd chalked that up to medication at that point. So, when I approached the Prince Charlie room that morning, I didn't think much of it. Well, I made it a couple of steps just fine, but by the 3rd step, it was like, I don't know, something was draining me. To this day, I can't really describe it at all. It was like nothing I've ever experienced before or since. I got to the 4th stair, and suddenly, and I mean suddenly, it felt like my life force was being drained. Oh my God, that sounds crazy, but that's the only freaking way I can describe it. It literally felt like someone or something was taking my energy, my being, everything away from me. I made it to the 5th stair, but felt dizzy, tired, so tired, perhaps something like sunstroke. But I just didn't feel tired, I felt confused, like maybe I was having a stroke. I tried for the 2nd to last step, but couldn't even make it. It became disorienting, dizzy, and I was exhausted at the same time. Fuck, I felt like I was dying, or at least what I imagined dying must feel like. I immediately stopped and retreated down the stairs. I made it to the chair at the nearby table and sat down. Things were starting to spin, and I was getting more and more tired. I think I sat there for about a minute. I'd started a new medication a few weeks ago, and told myself that just must be this medication. Yeah, I heard the voices for a couple of weeks now, but I too chalked that up to the medication. I approached the stairs, and at this time, I tried again. Slowly. I made it up to the room. I hurriedly grabbed the silverware, looked around the creepy-looking and overly dark room. Even in the daylight, it was that dark, and I bolted down the steps again. Wish I could say this only happened once. It didn't. It's only been a few years, but my sense of time is a little bit messed up. I don't know if this second incident happened a few days later or a couple of weeks, but I'm certain that it happened in the first couple of months of working here. One afternoon, after the above experience happened, I was working in the pub. I was still hearing voices, but there were always plenty of people around, so it never really scared me. Well, this particular afternoon I had started my shift, and I was near the service well of the bar. If anyone doesn't know what a service well is, it's where the bartender makes the drinks for tables of a restaurant. The server then takes the drinks from the well and brings them to the table. That particular day, Narina was working at the service well. Can't remember, but I'm certain that there was another server there as well. We were all chatting about something or other, when all of a sudden I felt the same weakness and dizziness that I'd experienced the morning I had gone to the Prince Charlie room for silverware. Again, I had never mentioned to anyone at this point about my experiences on the steps, so when the same feeling came over me, I ignored it. That is, until Narina said something that shocked me. Out of nowhere, she blurted, "I feel dizzy all of a sudden." Now, I can't remember if she said dizzy or weird, but I swear on my mother's dead grave that she said something to that effect. Enough for it to elicit an adamant and eager, "Me too!" No one knows how relieved I felt in that moment. For weeks, I thought I was going crazy, losing my mind crazy. Hearing my name all the time, draining my energy, I thought I was going batshit. The problem is, if you ask Narina about this incident, she has no recollection of it. She doesn't ever even remember saying that. She doesn't even remember feeling dizzy or like her energy was being drained, or like something really wrong was happening in that moment. By God, though, I remember it. Clear as fucking day. I remember being so happy that I wasn't the only person who felt that invisible force draining something away from me. But Narina doesn't remember this. She didn't remember this when I talked about it a few months later, and she doesn't remember it today. I often ask myself, what the fuck I even do remember? I never had any paranormal experiences before I started working at that good old Tom O'Shanter. And I was already in my 30s, so I don't understand anything that was happening to me. The year was 2000, and my two sons, then 8 and 1 years old, had moved into a newly renovated apartment. The building was a row of 4 townhouse apartments, and I was between 2 empty units with the only other occupied unit being on the end. My husband was away for work a few weeks. We lived in Okinawa for 6 years, but only spent 2 of them in this house. It was around 1 a.m. on our first night in the new apartment, and I was in the kitchen decorating and putting things away. Completely quiet. No radio or TV on. Kids had been asleep for a few hours, and the kitchen was an L shape. I was standing at the sink and window, which faced the front of the building. Behind me several feet was a swinging door to the dining room. To my left, by several feet, was a swinging door and entranceway to the stairs to the bedrooms. It was from that side door that I heard a voice, a child. "Mommy?" If you've ever heard a child wake up disoriented from a bad dream, or a child about to be ill, it was that level of distress. Just a single word right outside the door to the kitchen. "Mommy." Naturally, I listened, and I assumed it was my 8-year-old. So I called his name, opened the door. No one there. As I was standing there assessing, mere seconds have ticked by and I heard it again. only this time from the landing at the top of the stairs. "Mommy?" I was mildly disturbed at this point, but I called his name again and went upstairs. I looked in both their rooms. Both kids were sound asleep, doors still closed. Now I was definitely disturbed, but somehow managed to go back to the kitchen and finish what I was doing. A month later, my mother visiting from the States. One night she was upstairs using the bathroom and came downstairs to ask me why I had called her. I hadn't mentioned the voice yet. I told her all about it, and the next night she was sleeping in the sofa bed in the living room. My 8-year-old was with her. She woke up in the middle of the night gasping for breath, followed by a coughing fit, which had been a frequent thing for her, and eventually felt a hand patting and rubbing her back. When she stopped coughing, she turned to thank the 8-year-old. He was sound asleep on his side, facing away from her. Fast forward a couple of weeks. My husband decided to give me a break one morning and got up with the 1-year-old. After I got up, he told me about some strange things that were happening. He had put the toddler in the high chair, gave him part of a banana, putting the rest of it, still with the peel, well out of reach. He left the room for a minute, came back, and the child had the rest of the banana, peel empty where my husband had left it. No way he could have gotten it himself. Husband left the room again, but rushed back when the stereo, which had been on very low, suddenly turned to maximum volume. How I slept through that, I have no idea. When he went to turn it down, he saw something odd in the corner of the room, which strangely he already couldn't remember when he was relaying this all to me. It was a blank in his mind. He's super skeptical about everything and thinks that he just intentionally blocked whatever or whoever it was that he saw there. Every year we would get into 2 to 3 typhoons. During one typhoon in 2001, after several hours, the eye of the storm was perfectly over us. When this happened, my husband and I would go outside and enjoy the fresh air, assess the area, talk with the neighbors, before the storm returned to blow in the opposite direction. In the eye of a typhoon, things are super calm and quiet. We were right outside the open front door on the porch, and the kids were upstairs. And out of nowhere, this horrible scream pierces the air in the staircase. Think like horror film kind of scream. Woman being murdered in the shower kind of scream. The kind that echoes and sends chills down the spine kind of scream. It didn't sound like a kid at all. But my first thought was my son's. Husband and yanked open the screen door, and I called out to the kids in a panic. Right as they both ran to the top of the stairs, both completely freaked out. Talking to my oldest now, almost 30, he describes hearing the scream of a woman and thinking I had been seriously hurt. Talking to my oldest son in recent years, he recounted to me things that he experienced in that house that he'd never mentioned when we were living there. He experienced things often, but there are 2 stories in particular that stand out to him. The first, he went to bed one night and turned on his radio. It was set to full blast, something he didn't do. He turned it off quickly and then heard a man in the hallway bang violently on his bedroom door while yelling, "Hey!" My son called out an apology and then came downstairs to get some water, and noted that my husband and I were both on the couch watching TV. He knew it wasn't his dad that had banged on the door. Second, my son had gone to bed and was laying there a few minutes, not sleeping, when something made him open his eyes and look at the foot of his bed. Kneeling at the foot of his bed and seemingly playing with a toy or something on the edge of the bed was a girl. She was facing him, but looking just looking at her hands. Behind her and slightly to the side was a boy with his back turned, seemingly touching my son's DVDs on the bookcase. He said they looked to be about his age, the kind of blue and dark like a poorly lit hologram. He kept staring, thinking when his eyes adjusted they would simply disappear. Just part of his imagination. He said maybe 20 to 30 seconds went by and they both looked at him at the same time, the boy turning and the girl looking up, locking eyes with him. He said the expressions on their faces seemed like they were not happy they'd been seen. They completely froze like that and slowly faded away. When the fade was complete, his DVDs fell off the shelf. When he got up the next morning, the DVDs were on the floor and he knew he hadn't imagined it. We kept in touch with 2 out of the 3 neighbors in that building, and we talked about the place years later. They all experienced things involving kids' voices, pranks played, like cabinet doors opening, things like that. But the one that really sticks out, one neighbor's 8-year-old son was tentatively diagnosed with schizophrenia. He had been hearing voices of children outside of his bedroom door demanding that they play with him or they would hurt his baby brother. So, they sent the family back to the States where he could get adequate services. This is when they left Okinawa and that apartment, and the voices stopped entirely. No drugs required. Diagnosis revoked. We've been back to the States 20 years now, and I've never experienced anything like it before or since. My son and I developed a headcanon around this place, that a U.S. soldier had killed his family and then himself. My experience. When my son was 3, we moved to a new flat, and about a year after being there, I would have a feeling my son was behind me, and he wouldn't be. And out of the corner of my eye, I'd see what looked like my son and go talk to him, and he wasn't there and in his playing room instead. This happened every now and again, and I never thought too much of it. But when my son, when he was 6, I would hear him not just playing toys with himself, but asking questions and answering someone else's. One time he was having a full-blown conversation in the bathroom whilst brushing his teeth. So I said to him, "Who are you talking to?" He said, "Tommy." So I asked him who Tommy was, and he said, "My friend, Mommy." I said, "Okay, so what does he look like?" And he answered, "Just like me." So I thought, I wonder if this is who I've been seeing on and off for a few years now. So I said, "Is Tommy a ghost?" He looked horrified and said, "No." So I spoke to my mom about it, and she said that he would think of a ghost being scary. Ask him if Tommy is a spirit. I thought, well, he won't know what that even means, but I'll try. So one afternoon I said to him, "Is Tommy a spirit?" And his mouth dropped open and he said, "How did you know that, Mommy?" And I didn't want to say too much as I didn't want to put any ideas into his head. So I said, "I'm just guessing." "Why? How do you know that he's that?" So he started telling me about one day Tommy sat on his bed and said, "Don't be scared, Jack, but I'm a spirit." And my son looked at me and said, "But Mommy, I wasn't scared as I don't know what a spirit is." So I said, "Well, you're very lucky. It's not everyone can see them as a spirit. It's someone who died." And he said, "Oh wow, well Tommy's back alive again." So not to scare him, I left it there. That night I was watching TV and heard Jack running down the hallway and his face looking round in the doorframe at me. So I said, "Jack, why are you up?" And he vanished. I got up and Jack was fast asleep. I then went on holiday for a week without his dad as he was working. He went to a caravan and my niece was just asking Jack if Tommy had come, and he said, "No, he said he's staying behind to watch Daddy." So I didn't think much about it. We got home and my husband was behaving strange, causing arguments. He always walked out for hours, and I kept feeling like Tommy and I were speaking with my mom and said how my husband had changed, and Tommy seemed angry. My mom said to try to connect, but I never did try. It was a Saturday morning in August, and I had my cousin's wedding to go to, and my husband was an usher. I woke kind of early to an eerie feeling, and then a noise that something had dropped. I looked out the hallway, and Jack's door sign was halfway down the hallway and standing upright. No one could have done that, as Jack had stayed at my mom's. At the wedding, I caught my husband on the phone to an unknown number. We had a huge argument, and he ended it there and then. My heart was broken. I never felt Tommy at home again, and Jack said that he had gone. I felt so sad. Jack was so upset about his dad leaving also, and his friend. It also came out that my husband had bought this girl back to our flat. Back to our flat whilst I was on holiday. So made sense why he was watching his dad, and also why I felt Tommy was angry when I got home. I went to see a medium who told me that my son had a friend called Thomas. That sent shivers down my spine, as obviously Jack said Tommy. She described what he looked like, and again I went cold as she basically described my son. I asked her why he isn't around now, and her answer was, he was there to protect Jack. But all that I can think was maybe, why was it that he left when he was upset then? So when my son was 14, I had a conversation with him, and I said, "Do you remember Tommy?" He said yes, and described the clothes I used to see him in. And he said, Tommy would come and sit with me when Dad was really shouting and scared me. He would make me feel safe. And then, all these years later, that lady and what she said to me made sense. He didn't need to protect Jack once he left, as Jack was no longer scared of his dad's temper. Spooky house in Skelmersdale, Lancashire. So after telling my last story about my son's not-so-imaginary friend, I thought I'd share another one of my stories. As I said, I always had spiritual experiences since I was a baby. My mom said I'd watch things that wasn't really there and ask where it went to. So I always found it awkward telling many I see and hear things. Or dream things that are real for others. I'd started to date my ex who I married, and I went to stay at his house. I walked in and straight away felt a very gloomy presence, but said nothing. I was there for 3 nights, so I tried not to let it bother me. I went to use his upstairs bathroom, and they had this big mirror in there. I felt scared. I didn't know why, but the mirror made me feel eerie and so cold. I was scared to look into it. It just kind of felt like something was going to appear or jump at me. I never told him this, as I kind of thought that it would make me look kind of crazy. I had a shower in there, and the whole time felt incredibly uncomfortable. The shower suddenly felt so hot, and when I got out, I had these 3 big scratches on my bottom half of my leg. Had no idea how it happened. Once the weekend was over, I went home and didn't think much about it. I went back there a couple of weeks later and suddenly felt that strange presence again. Again, when using the bathroom, I felt scared, but nothing too much happened that weekend. Another 2 weeks later, I stayed again. I had a really vivid dream that he had woken me up, and I was crying. But in this dream was a man on a motorcycle and was hit by a white bus. When he woke me up, I thought I had to say about this dream, as that could be maybe just dusted off as just a dream, nothing too crazy to look about. So I told him what happened, and he looked shocked and said that's exactly how his dad had died. So then he asks me how I would dream something like that, and I had to explain all my life I've been like this. He accepted it quite well, and he asked if I felt anything in his house. So I said yes, and wasn't too nice, whatever it was, and his bathroom mirror especially scared me. Again, he was shocked, as he said that his brother saw what he described as a figure of death jump out at him from that mirror when he was looking in it to get ready. A black cloaked figure, he said. I hadn't seen that, but obviously, I wouldn't look in the mirror. After we had spoken about it all, I went to the shower, and the shower went hot again, and once again 3 scratches down my leg. That night, I was laying on his lap, looking up at him, talking and laughing, when a massive dark figure went right above me. I jumped and closed my eyes. I could hear my ex's voice saying my name to get me to open my eyes. When I did, he was looking round, as wasn't really sure why I had put my arms over my head to protect myself and my legs toward my chest. He laughed and said that there was a spider, as he knew I was scared of them. So I told him there was a horrible dark shadow right above me. He told me how he had heard stories about the people who lived there before, and they were apparently devil worshippers and did Ouija boards and weird stuff. But before I met him, he had a terrible depression and didn't leave the house, and I just felt it didn't like me there, as he was no longer as depressed and gaining confidence. I didn't stay there much after that, as he started to visit me and we moved in together. But that house was awful. They moved in and his dad died. He grew up majorly depressed. His brother ended up dying at the age of 30. His mom's still there and so depressed that she no longer leaves the house. I have no idea of the history, but so glad I never have to visit again, and my children never have to either. Old house in high school. This was 30 years ago. I'll never forget it. I was sleeping over at my friend's house. He was on the bed and I was on the floor. His room's at the end of the hall upstairs. Right next to his bedroom door is the door to his mom's room, the master room with the bathroom. On the other side of the hall is the door to the bathroom. Down the hall near the top of the stairs is his sister's room. Nothing else upstairs. The distance from the top of the stairs to my friend's bedroom door is maybe 15 feet. Not very far. So, we're laying down to go to sleep. His mom has already gone to bed with their 2 giant poodles. They slept on her bed every night. His sister is out of state at college, and there's no one else in the house, parents divorced. So, we're finally getting quiet and not talking, and it's quiet. And I hear someone walk up the stairs, walk down the hall to the area right in the crimp of our door. His mom's door and the bathroom door, and then nothing else. I thought it was just kind of an old house thing, because this was an old Victorian with hardwood floors throughout. No biggie. Kinda getting sleepy, I hear it again, same exact thing. So now I'm like, what the fuck? So no, I'm laying there and my head kind of tilted to watch the door and listening. I'm wide awake. It happens again. Then a few minutes later again. I'm like, what the actual fuck? So I'm kind of freaking out and I turn my head to look at my friend. He's in his bed, who I thought was asleep, and he's looking at the door. And then looks at me with that what the fuck look. So we both quietly get up, stand up, and get closer to the door. It happens again. We're bugged at each other. We wait, hold our breath. Basically, a couple minutes later, it happens again, and we both reach the door as the steps come to the area right outside his door. And he wax-wings the doors open. Nothing. Nothing there at all. The house is quiet. We step out and look into his mom's room. She has the door open. Both dogs and mom passed out asleep on her bed. In fact, one of the dogs lifted his head, looked at us, and then laid his head back down. We walked over to his sister's room. Nope, she's not there. Bed is made, no one there. We kind of stand there for a minute and whisper to each other things like, what the hell? That was steps, right? Footsteps? Yeah. House is still quiet, so we go back to his room, sit there chatting for a while, just kind of freaked out. Then we settle in to go to sleep again because it's getting late now. As soon as we get quiet and start to settle, footsteps again. This time my buddy leaps out of bed, grabs the doorknob, and flings open the door. Nothing. But this time, Buddy leaps out of bed, grabs the doorknob, and flings open the door. Nothing. So loud, my mom wakes up. She's like, "What's that noise? What's going on?" We just told her, "Nothing, go back to sleep." We go back to his room. We sit there and just kind of talk to each other about what we're feeling and what happened. Talking quietly, and it just keeps happening. Every few minutes. We stop talking, listen till it stops, then go back to whispering. It got to the point where we were laughing or giggling quietly because it was ridiculous. I mean, it was shoes on kind of footsteps, like dress shoes or boots. Loud, and the wood creaking along with the steps as it came down the hall. I spent many nights in that house, in that room, and this didn't happen every time, but it did happen often. So often that we got used to it and just slept. Same house at some point, hanging out in the backyard with my buddy and a couple of friends, drinking wine coolers or some shit. His mom was not home, sister was at school, and we were out in the middle of the deck in the day, maybe 3 p.m. I glance up at the second-story window as I'm taking a swig of my wine cooler, and I see a woman in his mom's bedroom window. I did a double take. She wasn't there anymore. I look at my bro, and he's looking at me. I was like, "You saw that?" He says, "Yeah, I saw something move." I looked up and saw something, maybe a woman. So we literally jumped up and ran in and ran upstairs and searched. Nothing. No one. Same house. My brother's mom was down in the basement. We were upstairs in the kitchen. She was getting food out of the freezer down there to cook for dinner for us. She's only gone a couple of minutes and we hear her scream. We ran down there and she's on the floor in the front, looking around and clearly scared. She sees us and she says, "Who else is here?" We look at each other and at her and we're like, "The fuck, no one. It's just us and you screamed." She's feeling out. We all go to the kitchen, and after she settles down and is making dinner, she tells us that she kind of bent over looking in the lower part of the fridge for something, and she clearly felt 2 hands on her back push her into the fridge. Same house. As a kid, my brother was being chased by his sister through the house around the dining room table, tripped and fell headfirst through the big mirror on a big credenza type thing. His head is through the thing completely. The mirror is broken above his neck, and the stud below shattered. The part above is just hanging there, and the wood like it should, I guess. But it's a big mirror, as tall or taller than an adult. Mom is freaking out. She pulls him out, and the second his head comes out, the giant piece of mirror slid down like a guillotine and shatters, like a split second from decapitating my brother. The Smiling Old Woman. A couple of occurrences with this now, but the first interaction I had with her was when I was about maybe 9 or 10. I lived with my grandma during this time, with my mom since we were going through a hard move. It was really stressful and complicated. My grandma lived in an old folks' home sort of thing, but not a nursing home, just a place where a bunch of elderly people lived. Anyways, my mom and I slept out in the living room on couches. And I remember one night that I was laying down trying to sleep, but couldn't. I remember sitting up slightly, then seeing a smiling old woman, dead ass, maybe 9 feet away from me. The weird thing was that I found that I could see her head. There was no body, it was just her creepily smiling face. I don't know if it was sleep paralysis, or if I was just what it was. I was just scared shitless, but all I did was stare for a while before I yelled for my mom and she woke me up. Of course, she saw nothing, and I remember it was gone after, but I was still strongly weirded out. I talked to my mom and grandma in the morning, and they blamed it on being a nightmare. Fast forward a couple of years later, I'm living somewhere new, and I'm about 11 or 12. Basically, same situation happens, and this time she's standing closer, but against my closet, and it's still her smiling old face. This time I turned over, went to bed, and forced myself to sleep, but I distinctly remember it being the same face. There's something there. I'll never forget the night of August 14th, 2021. I was fishing the river with my friend in a suburb of Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. We loved coming to this public park to fish because it was quiet, and there was a nice sandbar to fish from. This park had a Sioux burial mound about a half a mile from our spot. After fishing for the better part of the day, we decided to leave at dusk. In order to get back to our vehicles, we had to take a trail through the woods, which was about a 5-minute walk. I put a clip-on light on the bill of my hat so we could see the trail. I remember when I first glanced ahead down the trail, I saw 2 circular white lights that I assumed were fireflies. Once we got further down the trail, we were closer to the area where I had seen the fireflies. It was then that I saw a pair of eyes that were either highly reflective from the light glowing white, because they were very, very bright, and it wasn't long before I could make out a body. It was a very large white body on 4 legs, bigger than a wolf, but unnaturally skinny. Couldn't make out any facial features because its eyes were so bright. Wanted to warn my friend, but all I could manage to say was, "There's something there." We had no choice but to proceed, because this is the only way back to our vehicles. This thing just stared us down but didn't make a sound. My friend yelled at it to try to scare it away, but it did not react at all. I yelled at it after she did, and it responded back, mimicking my voice. I honestly questioned myself and thought I was imagining things, so I yelled at it again, and it responded back at the same volume, same pitch, exactly like my voice. At this point, we realized this was not an animal. We both continued on the path in silence, but I maintained eye contact with the creature. I felt like this thing was ready to attack us at any moment, but it just stood there staring. Eventually, we were out of the woods, and I could no longer see its eyes. We made it back to our vehicles and felt a sense of relief. I asked my friend, "Did you hear that talk back to me?" She said she did, and it sounded like my voice when it responded back to us. If she hadn't heard the voice, I would have assumed I imagined it. We went over what happened, and our stories were the same, except she said the creature had a wolf-like head. After our experience, my friend who's Hmong went to go see a shaman. The shaman believed it was an evil spirit and performed a cleansing on her. She was still shaken up by the experience for several weeks. I tried to hire a spiritual advisor online, but when I described the experience and asked for a spiritual cleansing of my own, they said that they were not available at this time. At the advice of one of my friends, I burned some tobacco and said a prayer that the entity would leave me alone. It took me several months to just feel normal again, but I still think about it on a weekly basis. I tried to do further research and contacted the management at the park. They said the park that we had gone to had an ancient Indian remains scattered along the river that were unmarked. They said that there were more Indian remains in that park than any other park that they managed. I contacted several Native American friends and was told the entity we encountered was a skinwalker. I know skinwalkers are part of the Navajo culture, but from what I read, it checks more of the boxes, more than any other supernatural being or cryptid. Mystery Light. Around 3 years ago, I was an engineering student at the University of Central Florida. I'd grown up my entire life as that kid. I was running through quadratic equations and college-level algebra by the time I was in 3rd grade. Under pressure from damn near everyone around me, I enrolled in university. I knew I didn't want to. Don't ask me why I did. I already suffered from issues with bipolar and a myriad of other issues with my upbringing. Needless to say, I was down, bad, at my worst. I was running through a fifth of Jack and a pack of Marlboro Reds a day. During the lowest of my lows, I liked to skate down to the reflection pond. I'd like to put in an earbud and listen to some music, look up at the stars, the ones I could see anyway. Gotta love light pollution, huh? It was one of those few things I could do to calm down. One of these nights, I skated there with my trusty S&W in my hoodie's front pocket. I planned on ending that life, my life, that night. Well, in the middle of listening to Funkadelic's Maggot Brain, good choice. Long story short, it's my soul-searching song. Me too. Something rather strange happened. While I was looking up at the stars, one of them seemed far brighter than the others, unusually bright. Within the span of a half of a second, my music had become white noise, and this white light shot down towards me. It surrounded me completely. I tried opening and closing my eyes and getting up and walking around, all to no avail. I could hear something trying to speak to me, although I could not understand it. Then it was gone. It just shot away from me, back into the sky. Upon its departure, I had an overwhelming sense of peace. No more inner turmoil. No more hatred. No more regret. Solely peace and acceptance. I skated back to my dorm and fell asleep. This feeling of peace soon eluded me, and I went back to my old ways. Much better now. Strangely enough, this happened again a few months ago. I was doing limited energy electrical, and I was up on the top of an extension ladder. I was installing some lighting in an RV resort, and there was a decent bit of foot traffic. Elderly couple on their golf carts, things like that. With my ladder set up on the sidewalk, I made sure to flag it off. After moving it over to work on my fourth fixture, I looked down and saw a man on a golf cart coming toward my ladder. And he was by no means going slow, with a golf cart lane and a road available. I'm not sure why he was on the sidewalk. Anyways, I saw him slam into the bottom of my ladder. From 32 feet up, I began to fall. I positioned myself to land properly, but I never hit the ground. Inches from the sidewalk, the same white light returned. I was stopped mid-air and had an experience with this mystery light identical to the ones years prior. When I came to, I was standing on my own 2 feet, unharmed. Till this day, I have no idea what saved me or why. All I know is that I should be dead, or at least very and severely injured. Right now, I'm perfectly fine. Stuck in a loop. This event happened back in 2002. I was working for a school as an IT tech and support staff, and I was working day. I normally get out at 7:30 to be work before 9. The day before, I didn't do anything unusual before going to bed. But the day after, when I wake up or try to wake up, was so weird. So I woke up the first time with my alarm. I switched it off, noticed it was 7:30 from the clock in the living room, and went to go do the usual morning ritual. Brushing my teeth, toilet, taking off my PJs, start to iron my shirt. Then poof, I was back in bed. The first time I was thinking maybe this is just a weird deja vu moment, so I got up again, but noticed it was 7:40 now. I did the same stuff till the ironing part, and poof, back again in my bed. This time I was really freaking out, but still doing the same stuff. I noticed again the time passed another 10 minutes, and once again after the ironing I went straight back to bed. I remembered I was urging now to get out of this loop. Strange part is, I never tried to do something different, because every time I woke up I thought I was out of the loop. I remembered every time I woke up it felt so real. The sun shining on my face was real for me until the moment I warped back into my bed. I think this loop happened for 20 to 30 times, and until the last time, felt like every other time. The final time that I woke up, I did precisely the same things. It was around 11, and I was late for work, but I got out of this loop. Strange was that the time was correct. The stand of the sun was also changing with every loop. I remembered on the later loops that the sun was shining more brightly on my face when I woke up. It felt like my body was still asleep and my soul was waking up without my body. I noticed everything from my surroundings, the time and the sun. I finally knew I got out of this loop because I finally did more than ironing. It sure was scary. I think I had an out-of-body experience a few years ago, maybe. I was scrolling through here and saw someone mention one of their out-of-body experiences. So, I thought I'd share something similar that happened to me a while ago. Around the beginning of May in 2016, some friends and I, all 13 to 14 years old at the time, were hanging out together at a birthday party. It was pretty late at night when we decided to watch a movie. The TV we were watching the movie on was super small and high up on a wall, and I remember craning my neck up just to look at what we were watching. The movie was also pirated, shh, don't tell anyone, via a Fire Stick, so we were subject to a lot of shaky camera work in addition to the chaos in the movie. Fantastic beasts and where to find them. I remember the night vividly. So about halfway through the movie, I had what I can only describe as an out-of-body experience. I've never had anything like that happen to me before, and I haven't had anything like that happen to me since. I was not spiritual at the time, and I still remain agnostic and skeptical of stuff of that nature to this day. But this was so strange. I still can't explain it. I've tried to rationalize it as just quote-unquote falling asleep. But my friend sitting next to me at the time confirmed that I was fully awake that night when I asked him if he saw me pass out or anything following this particular incident. I asked him about the incident again a few weeks ago, and he still sticks by his story. I remember it freaking us both out. On to what I actually experienced. I vividly remember this whole thing. I was looking at the TV, facing forward. Then my vision went completely sideways. I remember describing it to my friends as like when you die in Minecraft. And then I was suddenly floating above my body, like about 4 feet above my body, and everybody chilling on the couch. I was floating, watching everything from the top left corner of the room for just a few seconds. I could see myself still looking in the same direction I was looking in before I was launched out of my body, so to speak. And then I was back. I remember immediately turning to my friend and going, "Dude, I think I just astral projected." Sort of as a joke, but then I started explaining it to him and we were both starting to freak out a little bit. Not in a bad way, more of in a giddy way. Then he started to explain how I looked, that I wasn't really paying attention to the movie at all from his perspective. So I definitely didn't fall asleep while that whole thing was happening on my end. Seriously, one of the strangest experiences I've ever had in the 18 years of my life. My astral projection is still an inside joke between me and the friend who saw me space out. What could this possibly have been?